In your response in paper 2 modules to Amanda Laurie's novella Vertigo, it's very important to look at part 1, part 2 and part 3 in terms of prose fiction. Part 1 is the orientation. Part 2 is the rising action and complication. Part 3 is the climax and then resolution. So it's a short but very traditionally structured narrative. I've chosen to visually represent here a passage from part 1, and you can reference it on page 17. I'll read you the passage. It was just after 7 on a mellow Saturday evening when they turned off the highway and drove into Garranella. A deep coral sunset flared along the ridge of the western hills. Beside the silent headland, the lagoon glittered in a wash of silvery pink. The house was musty and dark, but when they entered its cobwebbed hall, they trembled with a frisson that could only be described as ownership. It was as if the house had been waiting for them. While they unpacked, the boy prowled through the house on his own so that they could hear the squeak of doors along the hallway and the creak of floorboards as he peered into the corners of empty rooms. He was way ahead of them and he was restless. So when you're looking at a passage such as this one in terms of distinctively visual, we're looking at language choice. We've got the deep coral sunset and the lagoon glittering with silvery pink. So the use of colour imagery is very strong. And then you have contrast with house being musty and dark, and you've got light and dark colour and a lack of colour. And the boy prowling through the house on his own, you have very poetic devices there, very strong onomatopoeia in terms of the squeak of doors and the creak, squeak and creak. Even though they're sound devices with onomatopoeia, they create that visual sense of a house in disrepair, empty and uncared for until they move in. So predominantly you have colour imagery in this passage and onomatopoeia, creating a sense of a visual place. I'll proceed in the next clip to look at a passage from part 2 in terms of rising action. Stay tuned.